Once your goal is sharply but realistically defined, all that remains is carrying out your plan. In other words, you'll never know how good you might have become unless you try. So let's get with it.
Alright, y'all, welcome back. We're going to start chapter 3 today of Mike Mentzer's high intensity training book. If you're new here, what the series is about is knowledge, sharing knowledge, understanding how things work, and getting new perspectives, all in terms of bodybuilding. I'll basically be discussing books throughout the time that I make these videos, and the first book is on the heavy duty philosophy, so basically Mike Mentzer content. We're going to explore everything related to Mike's philosophy, that is training, that is nutrition, rest, training strategies, anything that he came up with, we're going to discuss here. Chapter 3 is about training principles. We're not going to explore the exact principles of heavy duty, but it's mainly about the need for principles if you want to reach a high level. And I've mentioned this before, to where it's so impressive how Mike's content is so applicable to today's world. This is literally how the chapter starts. The commercial bonanza that the bodybuilding and fitness market enjoys has led to a long line of self-proclaimed authorities and experts. Well, is it different today from when the book was published, 2001? How many specialists do you see online which they have like no credentials, they just post something, they might have mid physique or a nice physique and then they say it, so it's true, right? Mike proceeds. The result has been a ceaseless profusion of information that no one, including the purveyors of such information, along with those for whom it is intended, has been willing or able to interpret. And I feel like in today's world, this is even more important, the need for principles, because the noise is much more intense now. Imagine back then, 2001. You see a lot of information, of course, television, you see a lot of information from magazines, journals, like newspapers, but think about the pace of information from today compared to then. If you open your phone, there you go. Like you need 5 seconds to see, 10 different types of information from the same subject. And what's right, what's wrong? Like how can you go ahead and determine what works in a world where noise is all there is, basically? And just as the importance of principles applies to bodybuilding, it applies to anything, right? Principles are going to be your guidelines, the directions that you can follow and adapt to your own journey, of course. So understanding the principles behind whatever subject, it gives you a strong base to where there are going to be times, of course, where you're in doubt of something. You don't know where to go. You always question something. That's the nature of anything, right? Like if you want to reach a high level, you're going to have moments where maybe you're confused. You don't know where to go. You don't know who to reach out to. And principles are there for that. You always go back to the principles and then understand, okay, this is the better route and I'll try that. It might not be the right one, but again, the principles are going to be the guideline to where you're most likely going to be successful. And even then, if you're new to a subject, to where you just started to get interested, how do you know whether the person that you're looking at is actually a specialist? Well, this is where most part of your time is going to be devoted to research. And when someone does something for a while and it's been proven throughout time, odds are they know what they're talking about. But of course, you got to be skeptical and you got to have critical thinking, which is also something that's lacking these days. In this discussion, for example, there's the high volume, low volume discussion, of course. Mike Mentzer, of course, you're going to talk about that. If you look at Arnold's training routine back in the day, golden era, like not only Arnold's, but Arnold is just the most famous figure there. You're going to look at it and you're going to be like, okay, I have to train 3 hours, 6 times a week, and then I'll grow muscle. And then maybe that's true, or maybe that's not. There's always got to be that question behind the content that you're consuming. The more information that you gather from credible sources, the more you're going to learn and the more you're going to understand how whatever system works. And in this case, bodybuilding or building muscle. And in the process of learning, something that you cannot have, or at least if you do, you just got to find a way to overcome it, is the fear of making mistakes, right? Like I feel like today I have a pretty good knowledge on training, nutrition, everything related to building muscle. I am far from knowing everything. I'm far from being an expert, but I've been lifting for 9 years. I've been studying for 9 years. I've tried a bunch of things that worked, and I've tried a bunch of things that didn't work. The thing that's going to slow your progress the most is the fear of making mistakes, because you are going to make them, right? It's just make them fast so you can learn from them faster and then find the right answer faster. That's the process. So the first 2 or 3 paragraphs are just referring to how much noise there is out there and how, despite all that noise, you got to be able to understand that there are principles behind exact sciences, which is what he defends bodybuilding is. In saying that bodybuilding is a science, meaning it is exact, Mike is saying there are principles that rule the art of building muscle. And why do I say the art of building muscle? Because the sport in itself is a combination of science and art. Art is about presenting what you built through science. And again, I'm not talking about like the current science-based world, straight up bullshit. I'm talking about valid principles that explain why muscle growth works the way it works. Back in the day, you guys know high volume was the rule, right? Magazines were talking about it, Arnold was proclaiming it, and it was selling. So Mike wasn't scared to go ahead and say, man, is this really true? And here are the main questions that he made regarding the high volume approach. Number 1, if more sets is better, why stop at 12 or 20 sets? Wouldn't 75 to 100 sets be more preferable? Number 2, if everyone is different, and if each bodybuilder requires a different routine, why do these authorities advocate the same number of sets for everyone? Number 3 is whose word should we take? Who is telling the truth? The advocates of 12 to 20 or the advocates of 75 to 100 sets? Number 4, will a bodybuilder obtain equal results from 12 sets and 14 sets and 20 sets, or from 75 sets and 87 sets and 100 sets? And number 5, are all of the recommended sets to be performed with the same degree of intensity of effort by the same individuals all of the time? Whether you agree with a high volume approach, a low volume approach, whatever, the main lesson here that I took from the book, and I took from this chapter specifically, is the art of questioning things and looking for the best method through those questions, right? You can't just take things as they come. And again, the more noise there is and the easier access we have to information, the more we lose that critical thinking aspect of things. And that really can't happen, because then you can just say whatever you want and then people will believe it, and vice versa. And of course, that's going to lead to disaster because people won't think anymore. They just accept things as they are. If high volume doesn't work, how can you attribute such success to guys like Arnold Schwarzenegger or Lee Haney? Mike's answer is, while it's true that these champions do train in such fashion, what goes unreported is that so too have all the failures. The thousands of bodybuilders who never grew 1 pound of muscle from such practices, and who then gave up their physique aspirations and quit bodybuilding in a state of utter despair. The bodybuilding press doesn't report on those individuals. Furthermore, all who have achieved extraordinary levels of muscular development, including top champions like Schwarzenegger and Haney, possess an abundance of the prerequisite genetic traits, including long muscle bellies, greater than average muscle fiber density, and superior innate adaptability, which we discussed previously. So what are we talking about here? While there are people that have succeeded with such method, high volume training, those are considered the outliers in Mike's vision. The more people that you gather that use that type of training system, the more you realize that they're not really making progress. But there are specific people, the outliers, with the above average genetic traits that we talked about in the previous chapter, who are able to endure such high volume sessions. Mike proceeds to defend his case here. It should also be noted that training method currently attributed to a champion bodybuilder is not necessarily the same one he's always used. In many cases, like the champs, started training careers and developed the bulk of their muscular mass with abbreviated routines performed 2 to 3 times a week, using basic exercises and heavy weights. And if I'm not mistaken, but don't quote me on this one, I've seen videos where we see that Arnold built his physique or built his muscle through lower volume training and heavier training instead of spending hours at the gym. You would do heavy deadlifts, heavy benching, heavy squats, and that was his base until a point where he was doing higher volume later on in his career. And lastly here, Mike includes the usage of PEDs, which allows people to recover faster and, again, endure more volume. Here's what he says. For certain bodybuilders, increasing the duration and frequency of their workouts was done in conjunction with the use of steroids, which helped to prevent or at least reduce the loss of muscle mass and strength that otherwise would result from such marathon training conducted over a period of time. And who said Mike Mentzer himself didn't train high volume? As Mike mentioned that people train differently in different stages of their career, he shared a little bit of his own story. And it turns out that when he was 11 or 12 years old, his dad bought a bunch of dumbbells, and then it came with a manual, a training manual, aka a place where you go for principles. And guess what? He found that training 3 times a week with higher intensity and lower volume was the approach in that manual. Alright, he followed it. So in the next 3 years, he went from 95 pounds to 165 pounds. Isn't that impressive? He also mentioned that his arms measured 9 inches whenever he was 11 or 12. And after those 3 years training, he went from 9 inches to 15.5 inches. And once he built that physique, he started visualizing his future, and he strongly believed that he could be a massive competitor. Understanding that he had the potential to go from an average bodybuilder to a very good bodybuilder, he started looking at the training methods from top bodybuilders at the time, which were all high volume. And for the next 4 years, Mike engaged in high volume training. By the time he was 19, Mike joined the Air Force, 12-hour shifts, 3-hour workouts 6 times a week, and he saw no progress whatsoever. And there was a point where there was no time to do anything in his life, so he started questioning if bodybuilding was really for him. If all the champions are doing this, and he is doing the same but not seeing any progress and sacrificing so much of his time, why keep going? And by fate or luck or whatever you want to call it, he met Casey Viator, and I hope I'm saying his name right. Casey was the 1971 Mr. America winner, and he was 19 years old when he became Mr. America. Not only that, Mike, in his honest opinion, said that Casey was the best Mr. America he's ever seen. And unlike top bodybuilders who were training 6 times a week, 3 hours a day, Casey said that he was training for 1 hour for each session, and guess how many sessions? 3 sessions a week. My introduction to Casey and his methods of training in 1971 served to rekindle my enthusiasm. I entered the 1975 Mr. America, placing 3rd behind Robbie Robinson and Roger Callard. I knew that in order to come back and win the Mr. America in 1976, I would have to improve considerably, because the competition promised to be extremely tough, with Callard and Danny Padilla out for blood. And remember, this is right after a period when Mike was seeing no progress at the gym through the high volume training. So this was revolutionary for him, even though he already learned the method from when he started training. And in 1976, Mike won the Mr. America title. And with that title under his belt, he met the pioneer of high-intensity training, Arthur Jones. And in the time he spent with Arthur Jones, he learned about principles of human nature and principles to build muscle. But above all, he understood the principles behind how people respond to the training stressors. But above all things, Mike understood how high-intensity training triggers muscle growth and how people respond to the stimulus. But above all, Mike understood the principles behind people's response to high-intensity training stimulus. With a better understanding of the principles behind building muscle, Mike went on to get the perfect score in the Mr. Universe in 1978 and win the heavyweight category of the Mr. Olympia in 1979. And how is it possible that by learning something different, he had such exponential progress in such a little amount of time, where he was having no progress for years using a different training system? Mike's answer: you just have to train according to valid principles. So now, having learned all this, what is our job? Exactly what I said in the beginning. The same way Mike questioned high volume training, we must question whatever he found. Is it applicable today? Is one set enough to trigger growth? Do we know that? Well, we have a better understanding of it. Something that Mike defended, and it is true to this day, is that intensity is the main factor to stimulate growth. And then with that, you have to combine it with proper rest. With that, your muscle will actually grow. But the part of the number of sets, whether it's 1 set, 2, or 3, it will be individual. That's what we learned today. People have different recoverabilities, so what we're really looking for is the maximum recoverable volume. So first of all, you gotta learn how to train with high intensity. That is, 1 rep in reserve, 2 reps in reserve max, or going to absolute failure. While there's some risks to it, if you understand how it actually works, and that's a conversation for a separate video, you will be able to do it without any issues. And how do you find out whether 1 set is enough or 2 sets is enough? 3, 4, whatever that is. You keep a motherfucking logbook. That's how. The only way you find your limit is by reaching it or going past it. So you get a logbook. You get the workouts you can do for the week. You log your lifts, meaning you log however many reps you did with X amount of weight. And then when you go do that exercise again, I don't know if it's in a week, whatever your split is, you have to see, oh, I'm using the same weight, but I did more reps, or I kept the same reps, or damn, my reps dropped. Or another method is, I did 10 reps with 100 kilos on whatever. I'll go up a little bit in weight. I'll go to 102 kilos. And I got the same 10 reps, or even more. Damn, I'm recovering. So you haven't found your limit yet. And you'll only be able to be very accurate in this if you isolate all the other variables. That's why the sport of bodybuilding is so difficult, because we keep the system consistent throughout years, and that is going to bed at roughly the same time, eating roughly at the same time, things like that. And that's more serious, of course, the closer you get to a contest. But the only way to know how training is affecting your progress is if you isolate any other variable that exists. Training time, amount of hours you sleep, the food you're eating. That's the only way you'll understand the direct impact of your training methods. And this is too much for the average person. You don't need to do that to see progress. But again, if you're trying to be the most optimal, here's your take. That's what you have to do. It's simple, but it is hard. You have to track for a long time to understand the real impact of training in your recovery on your progress. So Mike finishes this chapter for those bodybuilders who engaged in the commercial bonanza of high volume training and gives them a little hope. For those frustrated bodybuilders who haven't given up, who refuse to allow the flame of their passion for a more muscular body to go out, who have some awareness of the role of facts, logic, and reason in their lives, let me assure you that there is a science of muscle building, and that it can be understood by anyone willing to exercise the required effort to understand 7 fundamental principles that, taken together, form the matrix of bodybuilding science. So there you go. If you're lost, seeing no progress, you've reached a plateau, whatever you want to name it. In the next few videos, we're going to dive deep into each of these 7 principles of building muscle. That was part 1. Now, for part 2, we're going to learn what those principles are in detail. Each chapter is going to be a principle. So by the time we finish part 2 of the book, you're going to have a pretty good understanding of each of these principles. And these principles are the backbone of what bodybuilding is, the science in bodybuilding. Hopefully, I'm going to be able to honor Mike's wishes and really do a good job at explaining each of those. And of course, we're going to be doing this, I believe, twice a week because I'm posting on Wednesdays and Sundays. But who knows? I might ramp it up a little bit because I'm enjoying this. I really am. And the feedback's been great. So yeah, next video, first principle, identity. All right, guys, thanks for keeping up with me. And next time, you already know, part 2 of the book. Peace.